I'm very confused because I don't think I need to be here. You're all very excited. Either you're pretending to be excited or you are really excited. Maybe you get so well paid and off work. So yeah, that's why you're excited. It's Friday night, maybe that's why you're excited. You know, I don't know. It reminds me of a story. A man was fired. The only job he could get was in the zoo, pretending to be a gorilla in a suit, in a gorilla suit. And so he thought, you know, always, I think he went to some of my seminars before, so he thought, I'm going to be the best gorilla I can be. And so he was very excited, like you. But he was more visibly excited. And he thought, like, I want to make sure I keep that job. So if I am a really, really good gorilla, so I can keep this job for a long time. Because the real gorilla had died and the zoo had no money to buy a new gorilla, so they replaced it with that guy. And so he was very, very excited, like I said before. So he was swinging on the rope, you know, he was trying to make the children laugh. And then one day he was working very hard. He was swinging on the rope back and forth, and suddenly the rope was slippery and he let go and he landed next to the lion's cage, in the lion's cage. There were 3 lions there. And the man was suddenly very afraid. He started shouting, "Help, help, help!" And one of the lions came next to him and said, "Shut up or we'll all get fired." So make sure you don't get too excited when you do your work, you know. I thought, what I'm going to say, what's useful, what's relevant. I know the corporate order. I know what you've been talking about during the day, vaguely. At least that was told a month ago. And I sat down yesterday without looking at those notes. And so I thought the best thing I can do is share some personal experiences as a follower and as a leader of the last perhaps 35 years, so that you can better relate to your own experiences today as a follower and as a leader. And maybe you can reevaluate some of your own beliefs and values about what it means to be a great follower and a great leader. You know, when I was in school in France about 15 years ago, so the guy told, one of the professors said, one of the traits of a great leader is that the great leader, first and foremost, is a great follower. The ones that are following the orders, making sure things get done right, these are the ones who get promoted, not the other ones. And I do hope that some of the stories I share with you will help you align better with your own goals, with your own needs, and also with the corporate strategy that has been discussed today. So, a couple of very, very brief comments before I tell some personal stories. First of all, who is a leader? A leader is the person who has followers. So maybe the best way to check if you're a leader is to look around your shoulder, especially when there is no sort of obligation, no formal obligation to follow you. If there is nobody there, then how can you be a leader? If nobody wants to follow you, if they don't have to. And sometimes it helps to check, double check, are you really in front? You see, this guy on the picture looks to be in front. But is it possible that he's not? Yes, how? Mm-hmm. Other guys passed him, so he's behind 1, maybe 2 laps. And so he's running very excitedly, thinking he's ahead, but he's not. One of the things for being a great leader, maybe the first thing, I think, is you have to want it. You really have to want it. If somebody sort of pushes you to the front, and then maybe you can do a good job, maybe you can do a decent job, but not really. You have to want it. You also have to know at any given time, why do you want it? And I'm sure as you grow older and as you change and develop, those needs and those reasons change. And therefore, I do believe that you have to regularly ask yourself, regularly evaluate, how have you changed in the last couple of years, 5 years or 10 years, or maybe 20 years as a human being? And what has changed in your desire to be a leader? And why? Why do you want that? You see, from one angle, I'm absolutely the wrong person to be here today. You're all leaders, managers, executives, team leaders, and I think you probably want to be, and so that makes us different. I don't. For a long time, I don't want to be a manager, I don't want to be a leader, I don't want to have any employees, I don't want to hire anybody. I once had a dream. I had a dream where in this vision, I signed, I think I've signed maybe 100 or 120 work agreements. And in Estonia, a work agreement is a very, very heavy document, almost like a marriage license. So when you sign it, you got to be really careful with that. And so that was a kind of a nightmare, because I thought, I don't want ever to sign another work agreement. So it brings me to some of the leaders I've had. That's the first one, right here. His name is Teet Saks. T-E-E-T, Teet. Unfortunately, he's dead for now, 15 years. And he was the chief of my summer brigade in 1985. We did this agricultural work, the group of 22, 12 boys and 10 girls. I met my very first real love in that summer. Nothing really came out of this, but it was very sort of expansive, very opening experience. And another reason why this summer was extremely important to me was that man here on the picture. Because the way he was very direct. He was very respectful to us young people. He was very firm. He was quite emotional, which probably is not maybe the best thing for a leader. But he was also very fast, in a matter of minutes, or maybe hours, to admit his mistakes and apologize if he had made a mistake. He didn't cover them up, and so he was kind of a real example. Somebody to look up to, especially I was 17 at the time. And another thing why I hold him in very high esteem was the way he organized the pay, the money. You see, he was a clever businessman. He and the other guy who were leading this team of students, I think they made at the time, they probably made a decent 1 year salary in 6 weeks' time. Because they were working with this, what we called kolkhoz, collective farm. And so they were given assignments, which of course they gave to us. And so they were given money, like a lump sum of money. And I don't know how much, maybe half they gave to us. Maybe 70%. I really don't know. I can't ask him either. He's dead. And I'd like to share with you how we got paid. You see, he said, do your best in every field. That literally meant a field at the time. And earn your pay accordingly. He said, at the end of the summer, everybody will give everybody a score from 1 to 10 based on how you saw this or the other person to work in every different field. In the hay barn, in the field trying to clean up the plants, And so we did. Everybody got a score. And I've always been an extremely greedy person. Less now. But that was exciting. I said, if I work hard in every field, I get paid a lot, if everybody's fair. And so I did. And so those guys who in some of the areas worked hard, but not in others, they got paid less. And I was, like I said, greedy and enthusiastic, like that man working in the zoo. I got the highest scores, and I got the most money. So at this time, in 1985, within 6 weeks' time, I earned twice as much as money as my father earned in a month. So for a school kid, that was a big deal. The real first money. I invited this man to be the best man in the wedding, in my first wedding. I only had one so far. So, enough of Mr. Ted Sachs. Rest in peace. Then about 5 years later, after the 2 years in the Soviet military, where I did have a bunch of leaders, but none of them came to my mind yesterday, because I wasn't really looking up to them. I was trying to disobey every possible way I could, and I did good at that. But after this, I ended up in the US, like Ando was saying, selling books door to door. And so I'm talking briefly about 3 different men at the time. And the first one, his name is Tom McAuliffe. He was my first boss, the mentor. He was the reason, together with Madis Habakuk, how I ended up at that time in this country. And this, together with my first marriage and 2 children from that marriage, have been by far the most defining events of my life and my character. So this is when I was preparing last night, it got me kind of emotional. He is also my son's godfather. This is what he looked like 30 years ago. And this is what he looked like in February in Portland, Oregon. This is the most recent picture I've taken with him, with Tom. And Tom was extremely optimistic, was very confident. Maybe he faked a little bit of that, but not much. He was very, very genuinely optimistic. And I think the best thing he did for me and everybody else is he constantly, both in the group, in the meetings, and also on one-on-one on the phone and in personal meetings, he was injecting this optimism and confidence and belief into me and into others. Maybe the biggest gift of all. What he also did, he was hearing out difficulties when somebody had a hard time, encouraging very much. And so but he wasn't always very sort of, oh, I'm sorry you're having such a hard time. He had a different approach too. I remember one occasion when I was having very hard week. I had not sold basically anything. And so I called him and complained, and he listened, and he consoled me and was very sort of heartwarming. And then he said, at the end, he said, but you know what? Don't worry, because your friend Steve in the next town is having an absolutely wonderful week, and he is having a great day in sales. So combined, we are doing well. So he sort of put the pat on my back and the kick in my ass. I got very angry, so I hung up the phone and I went to work. And that one phone call turned this sort of pitiful week around for me. And the whole summer, I could have sort of gotten into the very depressed state and not wanting to do anything much more. So that was that. So we're still friends today. So this is Tom. Meet Tom. Glad to have you as my friend. So the second person from the very same period, his name is Dan Moore. And as you can see, I've sort of been able to make friends with my leaders, most important leaders of my life. And he is the godfather of my daughter. He calls me compadre. And so compadre is a godfather to the other guy's child. And at the time, Dan was a chief of training. He was a mentor, also a friend. He was extremely kind. He is extremely kind and full of care, very attentive, remembering all your details from the past, sort of referring to them whenever you meet. He pays you full attention, looks you right in the eye. And when he speaks to you, you know you are the most important person in the world for him at this moment, you know, genuinely so. He was very intelligent. He finished Harvard University in 3 years instead of 4. He was funny as hell. He was, we called him funnier than Eddie Murphy, who was very funny at the time. He was openly sharing personal experiences when he was teaching and training us. Here is Dan on the stage in probably about 1991, sharing stories and talking about his own life and his own past. And sort of whenever he speaks, sort of it moves you. At least that's what it did to me. Every time we meet, this is in April in Tallinn. He comes to Estonia twice a year or so. Every time we meet, he manages to say something that touches, like I wrote yesterday, some very tender part of my soul. So it goes right into the core of what I need to hear at the time, that it causes me, a grown man of 51 years old, this sort of very slight but very strong emotional occurrence when you feel like a couple of tears are coming to your throat, you know, not in the eyes, but in the throat. You know that feeling when somebody says something, touches you gently, you go like, ooh, thank you. You go like, oh. And I'm very thankful to him for his friendship, for all the qualities he embodies as a leader, as a boss, and as a human being, as a friend. When I think of Tom, Ted, Dan, and other people also, just lucky to have had such influences, lucky to have had such examples to look up to learn from, to emulate, to copy, to model. And the third guy from that period is Jerry Heffel. He at the time was president of the company. Now Dan is a president of the company. It's called the Southwestern Company. And while I was the very first one from Eastern Europe to participate in the program, today there are about 300 students from Estonia alone that every summer go and sell books and get those skills and get those character traits needed. Well, Jerry, I'm not going to talk much about him, but he was a true gentleman. That's what he looked like and in 1993, and that's what I looked like in 1993. I have a little bit more hair, American smile, very funky tie. And so, because I was the first one from Eastern Europe, basically from Russia, so I was a special. I was like the man in the gorilla suit. So I got to see the president the very first summer, and they treated me like royalty. And so what Jerry did is Jerry gave me a book for gift in 1992, The 7 Habits of Very Highly Effective People. And that's one of the 2 books that have been most impactful for me in my whole life. The other one is called Transpersonal Development by Roberto Assagioli, Italian psychologist, dead for a good 40 years by now. But why I'm talking about Jerry Heffel is because when I did my very first real, this is what Jerry looks like today. But when I was doing my very first real job in 1997, I think, sales manager and the sales director in a wholesale company. So what I did is I copied the stuff I learned in the US in terms of sales and sales management. And for about 80% of the stuff, it worked out quite well. That also was the content of my very early sales and management training seminars. Some of you have been participating in those back to 15, 20 years ago. And so One thing I learned is that when you have a team, let's say, of 8 to 10 people, we were taught to have at least 20-minute conversation with every single one of them, face-to-face, maybe on the phone, if face-to-face was too hard. So when I promoted myself to be a sales director, because that's how I promoted myself. I expanded the organization underneath, so I automatically raised higher. And so suddenly I was a leader of leaders, like you are. And I did what every normal person would do. I called the guy who knows the best. So I made Jerry Heffel a phone call. It was in the winter of 1995. And I said, listen, I know how to manage salespeople. And that has worked out so far well for me. But now I have to manage leaders, so please tell me what to do. He said, fine. He gave me what I call the shortest and the most exact leadership advice ever. He said, pay regularly personal attention to everyone. You remember that? I said, yes. Have you done that? I said, yes. So he said, so if you want to lead the leaders, teach them to do the same and observe closely and then let them do it on their own. I said, great, thank you. Thank you very much. I said, tell me more. He said, no. He said, that's enough. I said, like, what do you mean? I was upset. I said, like, the man was getting just warmed up and telling me good stuff, He said, you'll figure out the rest as you go along. And I was a little bit confused. But later on, I realized he was right. The rest of the stuff I figured out myself. But that was most important. And when I used to speak to leaders, and when I do speak to you today, and also to myself, one of the things I'd like to say is that whenever you grow tired of doing that, speaking to your people once a week, 15, 20 minutes, really speaking, one-on-one, face-to-face, or on the phone, if you don't want to do that, then maybe you should stop doing what you're doing. Maybe that's not for you anymore. Because I think that's what makes a real manager, that's what makes a real leader. And I'm very serious about it. If we had a simple conversation, you and I, over the beer, I will tell you the same thing, exact same thing. They taught us two things. Number one, they said, if you as a follower at the time in the sales job want to be successful, then you have to do only 4 things. You have to study real hard, learn what you're told, you have to work very hard, as much as we tell you, no discount, no exceptions. You have to control the controllables, which are your attitude, the number of hours you work, and number of calls or meetings you make with potential buyers. And the last thing, which I personally attribute to my well-being and my success, to whatever success I've had in my life, is the last one on the board. It's called be teachable. I only realized recently what it means in my own language. I used to use the word õpetatav, which is not a good word, It's vormitav. Ole vormitav. Be teachable. Be moldable. Don't question at first what they tell you. Do as told. Learn it well. And then learn to do it better. And then you can change your approach. But at first, if you start arguing what you're told, maybe you can tell your people the same thing. Then that doesn't work out. Usually, the people underneath are not smarter than the people above. Usually. On the very rare occasion, they are. But then those people don't argue. They are good followers first. And then they become leaders, like many of you. And then they taught us the leader's creed, how to be a good leader. Literally, they told us to tell this to new guys and girls. They said, if you sit down with somebody and you make an agreement, you say first, you can always count on me. And I also always will need to be able to count on you. And they said, we both need to level with each other. We both need to tell each other as things are, about feedback, about performance, about what's okay, about what's not okay. And the last thing I think was most profound, which has been following me all my life, which says, I will never ask you to do anything that I personally would not be willing to do. Never. That doesn't mean I will do it now, but if I had to, I would do it, you know. So, lastly, I took all that after my first, so to speak, real job in a wholesale company, and I started the training and consulting business, Vain and Partners, which turned from one-man show to a world-class team. I know these are big words. I hope you don't mind me saying this, because this is about the team, not about the product or about the service. But we did have a great team. With, my primary team is here. Two guys, Urmas Purda and Timo Rein. One of them is my best friend for the last 22 years. The other one is a close friend, but not as close as Urmas. They're both co-founders of a company called Pipe Drive. That's the sign that you most have likely seen in Tallinn on the top of the building, which grew out of my company from Vain and Partners. And this is a picture of the training company team, perhaps in 2002. Of course, there were other people later on. The team was bigger. That was one of the sort of jolly moments we had. So why I'm showing this and talking about this is that I took everything I learned and I used to my advantage and to my people's advantage and to my clients' advantage to the very best ability I could. It worked out great. One of the things I'd like to emphasize is very careful selection based on the values. We worked so hard to figure out, to define our joint values as a leadership team. And then we put this into words and we define them into actions, and then we use this as a sort of a code of ethics or code of conduct. It was very, very helpful. We did have extreme business orientation, very specific goals, very ambitious goals, very high standards and demands to ourselves. Open atmosphere, very sort of not so formal, quite friendly, and mutual accountability. And whenever I speak to Urmas and Timo, they say that all the similar principles have been successfully used in the company, the IT company Pipe Drive. And basically, I imported from the United States those thoughts and adapted them in Estonia. So they took it from there. And now this is a global company. I am humbled to say this because I didn't do it other than prepare the grounds for those guys. And but I'm happy to have had part in that. Key lessons in a nutshell. I think that if I only had to say one thing, which I haven't mentioned yet, is personal responsibility. No excuses. It's a foundation. The question, what went right, what went wrong, what was my part, what were my mistakes, what can I do better, how can we improve? No excuses, no bullshit. Building and encouraging, building people and encouraging people, that separates the great leaders from the rest. Always a task, especially when there's a lot of stress, a lot of difficulties. When people are losing confidence, it's your job to lift them up, like Tom did to me that time on the phone, both with a pat on the back and kick in the butt. Well-defined values, which I'm sure you have, hopefully align with your own values, that help to select people, help to reselect, that means keep them on board, help to deselect, send them home, elsewhere. Clear standards, specific goals, well-defined expectations enabled to measure, to give proper feedback, both positive and negative, and help people to self-evaluate, kind of in a way that I told in the first story about this magnificent pay system. I haven't been speaking much in the last 5 years, but I don't know how much I will, really. I came here because you invited me, and I came here because I have lots of connections with your organization and connections with many people here, personal, very long-standing. I didn't hesitate for a second, even though, like I said at first, I wasn't kidding when I said I'm confused, you know. The older I get, the more I realize that it's kind of weird to come and speak to you on the sort of very basic stuff that you know anyway, at the end of the day where you'd like to either go home or go to eat. So thank you for cutting this into half, you know. Looks like the half is okay too, you know, at least to me. So, and I think my future medium will be much more writing than speaking. I wrote the book, which came out in December. It's December last year, the second book I wrote. It's called Keset Elu, a Midlife. It's only available in Estonian language so far. And it's basically about happiness in the second part of life, navigating through the difficulties of midlife, you know, not letting the midlife crisis hit you too hard. And I think one of the tricks in midlife, but also in management, is that you have to make necessary changes before they bite you in your ass, before they make it absolutely clear and inevitable that you have to make them. So you're always a little bit ahead of the curve, not running after the changes and not really having to make them sort of in the crisis mode when like everything is in the red and you have no other option. That's a real crisis. If you want to navigate through the midlife crisis, then you have to make necessary changes before they become inevitable. So make all necessary changes also at work before you have to. And that will reduce suffering for everyone, also for yourself. And one thing I've always said, one thing that you can remember for yourself, and one thing, regardless of your age, and one thing you can remind your people is always grow, always do your best, and while always doing your best, allow your best to grow. That's also inevitable, very logical, very, very inevitable system. And when I thought, what's the last word I'm going to say? I thought I'm going to say stop when it's time. So when you don't want to be a leader anymore, don't drag it too hard. Just stop it, you know. You don't have to be a leader all your life, you know. There are different things to do, different ways to make a living, different ways to contribute in society and in life. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Maybe a story. Maybe the last one, I started with a joke, I'm going to end with a joke. It's about motivation, which Jerry Heffel told me about 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And it goes like that. One guy is telling the other guy, you see, there is this girl I met recently, and I took her out on a sort of full moon evening on a field near the forest. And I asked this girl, may I kiss you? And the girl says, well, if you take down the roof of your car, then yes. And the friend was very excited, so what happened? did you take the roof down? He said, yes. Took me half an hour, but I got it down, you know. And I kissed the girl. I was very motivated, you see. And the other guy goes like, half an hour, you know. I have a convertible. My roof comes down in 30 seconds. And the other guy says, exactly. You have a convertible. I have to put this last bit too, and then we're done. You see, there must be a shortcut, but that's it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I wish you a good year, a good 1st of September, a good dinner, good weekend. Thank you.